and members of the public either are watching remotely or here, and everyone else is very welcome. Before we start the meeting, can everyone make sure that all their devices, including laptops, are on silent? Because we're going to start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the tragedy.
Thank you.
Apologies of absence have been given by Councillor Bakhtir, apology, and Councillor Sylvie Wexon, and I think lateness from Councillor Serens and Councillor Benton. I covered all the races then.
Yes.
Does any member have any under 80 any interest to declare? Minutes of the meeting of the 17th of December have been corrected. Can I sign them as a correct record?
Great.
Our first paper is quarter one and quarter two performance delivery report, and I think it's two here. Brilliant. And we have Councillor Jofield. Jofield, Director of Government Legacy and Corporate Strategy, or Joe, terrible thing to confuse one. Would you want to give us a quick introduction?
Yeah, thanks very much. And I think hopefully the report speaks to itself. It's a shorter version of the report and hopefully more focused, partly in response to feedback from previous reports of this committee. I just wanted to highlight a few things. Obviously, this takes us up to the end of Q2, and so it doesn't include the impact of the recent cyber attack. And we are working with departments as we speak on Q3 and looking at what the impact is likely to be, both on some of the performance metrics and on some of the delivery of the council plan actions. So I think that will be a key focus for the next report. The appendix to this report also includes an update on the index of multiple deprivation, which you would have seen. I think just a few caveats around that, which is that is measuring relative deprivation. So just because sometimes it looks like scores have improved doesn't necessarily mean that life has got better for people. And they've changed the methodology, which means some of what is in those baskets around housing and health is perhaps different from what was there before. So we're not necessarily comparing like with like. And then just two final points. I think we are expecting more detail on the local government outcomes framework, along with the final financial settlement, local government financial settlement. And I think that is likely to take a broader view across areas, so not just local authorities, but wider kind of place-based indicators. So we'll need to consider the implications of that for what we measure and how. And also the team is doing quite a lot of work to refresh the performance dashboard. Unfortunately, we can't currently get that online, but the team has offered to share that with the committee first to test and get your feedback before we take it live. And I think it's worth saying, in line with some of the broader conversations that we've had with the committee about the vision for the future of the council, the kind of organisation we want to be, and the move towards a different target operating model. I think all of that work has implications for kind of what we measure and how we measure it. So as ever, performance reporting is a continuous area of continuous improvement. But I think we need to see quite big changes in that in terms of what we decide we want to focus on for longer term transformation.
Thank you. And just remind me, there's a missing bit which on page 10.4, which has been circulated, a missing bit of sentence. And actually, I think there was a bit I didn't spot in 2.8, where there's a missing bit of information. But overall, I think from my point of view, the report is much improved in terms of presentation and giving us a snapshot of things. So thank you very much for that. And just to remind the committee, we may have questions on it, but some of them will be best taken back to other select committees or to individual officers. But just general trend and questions, please fire away. I'm sure Joe will do his best to answer them. Greg.
Thanks, Mary. I just wanted to talk about the process, and Joe, you highlighted this. It's paragraph 1.4 of the main report. Talks about what's coming down the line from the government and some kind of directed report. So can you give us a bit more detail on that, please? Is this report going to have to be replaced by something in a different format that meets what the government requires?
Thanks, Councillor Allen. So the local government outcomes framework is replacing what was very briefly, or rather briefly, an OFLOG, which was another set of measures introduced by the previous government. We don't know exactly what these new measures will be. What we did last time is made sure that through the performance reporting infrastructure that we provided a kind of update on some of the key OFLOG measures. So I suspect we'll take the same approach here, which is wherever possible to try and incorporate the things that the government are measuring in our general approach to performance. They have indicated that they are more likely to be kind of wider place-based indicators, so that are the responsibility of multiple public authorities, not just the local authority. And as ever with the performance report, we've tried to strike a balance between the things within our direct control and the kind of wider indicators that tell us something about life in the borough. I think it remains to be seen exactly how the government are going to use that set of indicators. They talked about using it alongside financial information to form a view about whether councils are delivering kind of value for money and the best possible services for their residents, but we should know more in the next couple of months.
And well, you won't know the answer to this, but I mean, presumably they'll direct exactly what they want to see out of us, where we won't have 300 odd local authorities interpreting the requirements in a slightly different way.
Yes, I think so the previous, what they came out originally with, we have looked at those sort of proposed indicators and looked at where we are in relation to those things. They will be relatively directive. Again, it's the question of really is about how they will use that information.
I think what would be helpful for me is to know when I'm looking at a version of this report in a year or so's time, when well, assuming I'm still here, but in a year or so's time, to see what that, which of the questions in the report are based on ones we have to answer because the government's directed it, which are the questions that we've chosen to answer because we feel that that's a good idea, and to spend council resources on producing the answers to those questions.
Thanks, Councillor, and as ever, we'll try and, so I think what we did with OFLOG was to really specifically identify kind of where we were in relation to those government measures and to, I guess, wherever possible to make sure that, and where we fed into the consultations is to make sure that we're not having to create a whole infrastructure to measure things that we wouldn't otherwise be measuring for the government.
Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you. I've got three questions. The first was just regarding the overdue FRAs and if there's anything we can be doing or what we are doing in terms of leaseholders. I know it's obviously not our responsibility to be taking it on, but how we can, I don't know, enforce that so that residents surrounding those areas aren't at risk. And then, should I say them together?
Yeah.
The next was just in terms of the council website, and you sort of referring to the fact that we have team members who are temporary. I don't know if that ends up being more expensive and why we're not recruiting for a new team, particularly as I know we've had a lot of conversations about systems being sort of self-sufficient, particularly as we're making budget cuts that we have. Appreciate we're currently in a cyber attack at the moment, but that we have the best updated website and services for residents to be able to be doing as much by themselves as possible. And then thirdly, just in terms of the flagging of pupil suspension rates and how we generally perform in comparison to other boroughs across London on that, because I am not aware, but something I've spoken outside of a meeting also to well about, but I'm grateful to hear on that. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. I won't be able to answer all of those. On the website, I know that is, and obviously this is important to put together before the full impact of the cyber attack known. I think there is a concerted effort to look at the website as part of that whole programme of work, looking at rebuilding our kind of digital infrastructure and also the interface with residents. So I expect that picked up there, and I will find out on suspension rates, and there should be benchmarking data. We should have benchmarking data against our London, our London equivalents.
I'd be interested to see that plus exclusions. I know probably jumping onto your question there, but
yeah, great. We can definitely provide that. And then I suspect Dan and Jahid are probably best placed to answer on fire risk assessment and leaseholders, but yeah. Yeah.
Evening, Jahid Rahman, Director of Housing Management. Thank you, Councillor Knott, for that question. On the overdue FRA, the large proportion of the overdue relate to leaseholders' doors not being fully compliant. So I think from a regulatory perspective, as long as an organisation can demonstrate that we've notified the leaseholders and we're taking legal action in order for the leaseholders to be compliant, I think that satisfies the regulators. Clearly, we're working with our leaseholders to make sure that they're installing compliant fire doors. Ideally, we would want to be doing that ourselves, so we've got clear record certification. Often, leaseholders would install their doors, but as an organisation, we need to make sure that it's compliant, and we've also got copies of the certification. So we're working through all of those smaller issues whilst engaging with the leaseholders.
Thank you, and welcome to this committee for the first time. Will, did you have a question?
Yes, I got a question. And there's a lot of information in here, and I find it a little bit difficult on occasion to know where to zoom in and out. But just to give you an example, under 1.6 on the sort of second page of this report, it refers to the fact that there's going to be some service delivery issues with regard to social care reform legislation of children's services and various other changes in that respect. Have you taken into account the fact that of the things that are already playing through family and children's services? I've got a page full of examples here, just to pick out a couple. The reorganisation of it into one service across two boroughs, rather than being one director across two services, one in each borough, and the bringing together of daycare, nursery, and primary under one management, and sometimes in one place. And working with family hubs and stuff. It's been a massive reorganisation over the last 12 months. It's not really reflected in this report. It depends on where you take the date to. I find it very difficult. It mentions that some issues have changed, but it doesn't take into account this. And we have tackled that, to take Mary's point, in the FCS Select Committee. But it's how this report relates to OSC as opposed to FCS, and then how we understand it, especially since we're looking through the metrics of departmental-based RAG. This method of RAG, which is in relation to the CPAP, actual plan, and then there's also the one that you've said, the governmental one as well. So we've got three dials, and how far do we go down into the detail in which committee? It needs a bit of clarification as to where we want to be looking at it, where the focus is.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Pascal. Just to take that, so I think where we've included information, I totally appreciate that point about the kind of specificity of the changes to services. I think we would be most interested in that for the purpose of this report, where it was affecting either the delivery of one of the council plan actions or one of the performance metrics. I think the broader point about the role of the committee in relation to this is a really good one, and I think it's something I know we've discussed previously. We could move towards a system whereby we provided some of the raw data in the form of a dashboard and then looked very specifically at some issues, either here at OSC or through the select committees. I know that is happening, and I know this information does then lead select committee chairs to look at some of these issues in more detail. But that balance, I think, is certainly something that we can.
With that, are you aiming in this report with this committee to say here are the things that are important for you to look at by red brag or whatever? It's the what's the focus of this table as opposed to the select committee or some other working group?
Yeah, and I think historically our aim is to give you a good overview of the kind of key areas of the key risks and issues. So the RAG rating, both in relation to the CPAP and in relation to the corporate performance monitoring. But I think partly because we do need to be more disciplined about what we are looking at as an organisation. I think through the transformation work, if we move towards perhaps a more limited set of indicators that really are corporate indicators, and then perhaps a much wider range of metrics that are monitored in departments and across directorates, that might help with that.
Because in another time when you were around the table, we were talking about transformation.
Yes.
IT came out as probably one of the top things, and it's not flagged in the same weight in this report.
Yeah, that's well taken.
Thank you, Joanna.
Thank you. Question for housing. Given that this report is Q1 and Q2 and we're now probably called Q4, could you give us an update on our floor in terms of resourcing? Because that's flagged as answered in this report about lack of resourcing, particularly not enough surveyors.
Yeah. So as you know, Councillor, our floor came into place in October last year, and that sets a specific timetable around when repair gets requested, how quickly we need to be on site, how quickly we need to write and share the surveyor's report, and how quickly we then need to do the remedial works. What we have at the moment is an internal tracker showing our position against those key timelines. So to what extent are we compliant against the legislative timescales that's been set out? What we're working towards, and what cyber attack has delayed us, is having a automated CRM system that enables us to do that. So at the moment, it's all being manually logged and tracked by a spreadsheet. And largely we are compliant. We do have some backlog. However, the ideal position we want to get to is making that whole process automated and tracked for a CRM system rather than a manual workaround, which is what we've got at the moment.
And this is also talking about lack of resources. Has there been recruitment to those posts?
So we've got a number of surveyors across the repair service, and they're being used in a fairly agile way in order to meet the specific surveyor requirement. So whilst it's always good to have more surveyors, we're utilising the resources we've got at the moment. Has that contributed towards a delay with our surveyors getting on site? And can we do with more resources? I can quantify that for you and come back with a written response.
Just a couple of questions for Joe. The deep dive, it's very interesting to read, but what do we do with this now?
Yeah, well, I guess so. It comes back to sort of what it tells us and what it doesn't tell us. And I think that for the index of multiple deprivation, it is relative, and the baskets, as I say, of indicators that they use are quite unusual and sometimes a bit counterintuitive. So some of the housing domain, for example, is actually housing and wider services and includes things like digital connectivity. So it's not directly related to housing, but it becomes housing as a shorthand. I think what the team is trying to do is both kind of dig into the data that is there in more detail and understand some of the trends, but also to look at it alongside some of the other information we have. So the low income family tracker, which tells us about households in low incomes in the borough, alongside the results of the resident survey, which there should be an update to the committee on shortly. And I think to essentially to look at some of the data that services hold about those who they serve, who are most deprived in the borough, and to make sense of that as a whole, rather than, as it were, to take the index of multiple deprivation alone as the best indicator of what we're doing. Through the Fair Action Plan, we've made a commitment to kind of target services and interventions more effectively to those who need that support. This may help us with that, but I think it only helps us with that alongside a wider look at some of those other sources of evidence.
And just one minor one, on page 37, recycling rate. So this has moved to a red, and yet literally we're talking about 0.8% of a reduction. And I kind of look at that and I go, it's quarter 3 is 22.6, quarter 4 22.7, quarter 1 24, quarter 2 23.2. And I kind of look at that and I go, is that really needing to flash red? And actually, perhaps the tolerance of this and some of the others should be revisited as to whether there's flag red enough that they get reported in that same way.
Yeah, I think that's the question. Obviously, there's finely calibrated question both about the target and about the tolerance, and I think getting those two things right is crucial. I think recycling rate was, for example, one of the things that the off-log set of measures, the previous iteration of the kind of government-led measures, was very interested in, and so that's partly why it's kind of given that profile. But I think that's certainly something we.
Funnily enough, it was one I was going just to sort of jump in, one I was going to comment on, because actually it's persistently, I mean, I know it's been agreed, but it's persistently lower than we would actually like it. And it costs us a lot of money. And when we talk about our pact with residents, it's potentially one area where we might actually start demanding more of our residents in terms of, it's a way they can easily save us money or save themselves some council tax. If we got those rates up high. But it's,
and I think, Councillor, if I may, that is a really good example of the way in which a kind of clearer sense of where we're trying to get and what we need from a new target operating model, a clearer vision of the council will help us and tell us what we need to really be keeping an eye on and what will make a difference to our overall financial position.
In fact, that begs the question as to whether the target is set too low if it's green at 24%.
Indeed.
British.
Okay, I have a very the FI has already been asked. This is more specific to housing. On page 18, I was just a bit concerned about the homeless sleepers. Our target's 10, but it says at the end of Q2 there were 18 rough sleepers. So that was one of them. And the other thing I felt was, I don't know if I missed it, but there wasn't enough impact on what good procurement will have on the transformation and delivering everything.
Great, thanks. And I will check that the rough
Yes,
sleepers figure. Yeah, but I
Yeah.
agree it's a kind of noted an area of worry. I think this comes back to a point that's been raised by the committee before. I think we want to strike a balance between things that obviously have an impact for residents because they're about direct service delivery, but some of those key indicators around procurement will tell you quite a lot about how efficiently the council is doing things. And I think particularly when we think about things like the impact of the cyber attack, I would want to be in a position where we could tell you about what that's doing both to frontline service delivery and to some of our kind of back office functions. Again, I think that's an area where if we move to a clearer kind of sense of where we want to be as an organisation, actually that will unlock some of those questions about what we measure. And I think procurement is a very good suggestion. It's one that I know Councillor Wheel has made before about how quickly we are turning some of these things around. So yeah, take that away. Thank you very much.
Going back to the rough sleepers, to some extent, statistics like that are victims of the law of small numbers. I mean, they're just
Yes.
too up and down. There's a huge percentage, but actually kind of negligible. Although obviously it shows a trend. I mean, the housing indicator I wanted to raise was the homelessness duty acceptance. I mean, that's wildly red. And I'm wondering again, perhaps coming back to Joe's comment about whether that's a realistic. I mean, I know we heartily wish that we were at 60%, but is that at all realistic? In the sense it doesn't matter, but it's extremely high. Daniel, do you want to come and comment on that?
So it is high, and not only is it high compared to the target, it's high compared to what it has been historically, and there is a very particular reason for that, which is that it's not a good reason, but the team we have a very serious backlog of cases, and what that figure represents is a particularly high amount of acceptances as we work back through that backlog, which tends to be a kind of a higher concentration than average of complex cases where there is a likelihood to accept. So I think it's absolutely right that we set ourselves the target of getting back to where the target is, if you see what I mean, because that's the rate you would expect in a steady state position. But that explains that it's not a good position, and I've been working with Kojo and the team to make sure that we understand how that backlog arose and that we can prevent that happening in the future. And I'm confident in the management arrangements we now have in place to do that. But it's a slightly anomalous. What you're seeing is the impact of a slightly anomalous period, which I think you can now.
Sort of skewed group of candidates.
Has that improved now where the course is?
It's improving, yes. Yeah, I mean, but we haven't fully cleared the backlog yet. So
By what percent?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Dan, you're staying with us for the Notting Down paper as well, aren't you?
Yeah.
So my final comment on this is just, Joe, you've talked about how this is going to perforce change. I think in some ways, if you're trying to take a step back, take the detail back to our committees and take a step back, page 24 is very important, which gives you a kind of immediate overall picture of green, red and amber over the whole thing. What you can't see there, and I don't want to ask for another thing, is the trend. Are we more greens than we were when we started off on the CPAN? And perhaps when you refine and change it and respond to other events, that might be something that we think about. You know, are we getting greener? Because, you know, you look at it and think, well, there's quite a lot of amber in there, but, you know, maybe it's less amber than it was before and so on. But thank you very much for this report. I think we all agreed that it's an improvement. It's a big improvement. Thank you very much for all the work you've done on it and for responding to our concerns. So now we have no other, unless Jen wants to make a comment on this paper, as a count of questions from other councillors in attendance, as they've said, no other members of the public. We can move on to paper A5, where Jeremy wants to make several comments. If that's due. So we're now looking at the revenue budget, capital program, and council accounts. We all feel that we see each other at least once a week.
And it's always gloomier news each time.
Yes.
Right.
Harbinger of doom that you are.
Yes. So shall I get going? So really, well, big thank you to the officers. They brought a whole doorstop to this meeting for us. So this is obviously our budget.
Every member has read what you
And all 351 pages of this. It's very serious. This is our budget. This is one of the toughest years that this council will be facing. One of the first of 4 years, which are going to be incredibly difficult. Who knows what the future looks like after those 4 years? But we can certainly say that the 4 years ahead of us are quite bleak. It's good of our Labour councillors who have put us in this position and their national party to attend this meeting this evening, so that we can talk about the budget. But sadly, we are having to pick up the pieces of what their government has done to this very successful council. So what we're bringing tonight is our approach to the year ahead, but also the years after as well. It does present a picture of taxes going up. It presents a picture of a huge amount of budgets being cut. And most notably, it's the 108 million that the Labour government is taking from our budget. You've heard me say this at every meeting I've come to, but it is such a huge number that we have to have it burnt in our minds. You know, I think we've worked really hard to get to a position where we are presenting a balanced budget, which, given all the other councils across the country, most of which are going to the wall, and you meet them in corridors of conferences and you just discuss the fact that they're planning to go bust next year or they're planning to go bust the year after. We're not planning to do that. We're going to keep this place absolutely functioning, setting balanced budgets year on year, and hopefully we'll be able to weather the storm that the Labour government brought upon us.
Thank you. Questions? Great.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Jen. Thank you to the whole team of officers who brought this together. This monumental piece of work, again, and more difficult than any year I've seen in the relatively short time I've been on the council, compared with some. There's still, I mean, obviously it's very difficult decisions. There are some things to welcome in here. I think including the streets investment. Thank you for putting that on despite all the pressures. But one sort of big question, and then a few areas of detail. So the big question is, how much certainty do we have as of today's date? Because what will change between now and when the council has to vote on the budget in a month's time? And then shall I go through my 3 areas of detail, and then you can write them down and come back to me on them. So page 51, third line from the top, proceeds of crime. I did read the explanation of that, and it seems to be going down year on year. Why is that? Can we use that pot for maintaining or increasing the CCTV network? Because I know that might be under threat in the general budget, because everything in the general fund is going to be under pressure. So that's the first detailed question. Second one, page 90. So where we've got, the second line down in page 90, this is just an example. The economic development budget, you're switching, or the economic development department, the funding for it, you're switching the funding away from the general fund and using ring fence section 106 monies that have been for that. Obviously, it's a clever piece of accounting there. And there's another example of those, I think, on the two social investment posts on page 95. So does that also include the costs of I think we were looking at in the statutory and non-statutory paper, the costs that are associated with employing staff, so these fixed costs that are attributed to divvied out amongst the departments. Have those costs been also attributed to the section 106 in this case? So that, I hope that was clear. That's my second question. And the third question on page 97, where we had, don't find it, I read this online. So profits, housing, social investment, there's two rather obvious blanks there, the second and fourth, where there's no explanation, and I'm wondering what they're all about, please. So there we go, those are my questions.
Who wants to respond to those?
Yeah, do you want to do the first one on the certainty?
First
Yeah.
one on the certainty. So the draft settlement came out, as you know, just before Christmas. We are expecting the final settlement beginning February, hopefully next week. Obviously, if anything changes, we will have to account for that, but we will certainly know for sure what the funding is by the time you have to vote on the budget. That will council at the end of February. If there's any updates between now and the leadership team on the 10th, and I'm conscious that the papers are published next Monday, we'll do an addendum to the papers, but we're hoping they won't do.
Hoping, how much confidence? I mean, there normally no changes.
There isn't usually any change. There might be the odd grant added or something, but it's usually coming in.
Thank you.
So economic development, section 106. So we had to look at essentially going through at pace to try and find savings. We had to look at some of the areas of staffing that had alternative funding sources. And we do collect money for economic development through our section 106 agreements. We have a whole SPD that sort of backs that up. So it is a legitimate use of money. We do have the team. You're right to highlight that it's a non-statutory service, that's why it's being funded by development contributions rather than general fund. And there was work had started on a review to the 106 agreements and the SPD that sits behind it. And that's with Johnny at the moment. I think he was looking at it more broadly, not just a single pot that we collect for. Historically, we've collected a lot of money for schools and children's, but actually we're seeing now the bigger pressure is on adults and those are older people, so perhaps that needs to modify. So that is, if to take the compliment, say clever accounting, I suppose it is, but in truth, it's just making sure that we can realise general fund savings using money that otherwise would sit or be used efficiently. On the two items.
Could I repose my question on that, because that's expanded on what I've read. But my question is, when we were looking at the costs of the different statutory and non-statutory functions, there was a column in it against each line which attributed the overheads of running a council, so the costs of IT and HR. So there will be some costs of having an economic development department. Have those costs also been transferred to section 106, and if not, why not?
Believe they have, but you can confirm. I think we do recharge accordingly, but not have to check.
We'll double check. They should be in there. We have to go back into the workings, but they should be.
It would be nice to think they were.
Yeah.
It would be nice to think. I want to confirm that they are, because it's obviously really important.
I'd be surprised if they weren't,
Yeah.
because that would mean there'd be lots of officers that their costs were being distributed across everybody else, which would be unfair. There's obviously HR costs, office costs, etc. So let's check.
It should be.
I would imagine. So.
Sorry, now you can go back to the others.
And then on the blank pages, I'm afraid I don't know, because they shouldn't really be blank.
No, they shouldn't. And they are year two, 27-28. We are just confirming the narrative that we're going to confirm for papers of dispatch on Monday. For full leadership team. The one on Chelsea Old Town Hall is around looking at how we use the building and save space.
I believe we have the potential tenant Chelsea Old Town Hall. I don't know how far through the negotiations they are, but they I think that could be the explanation for the 90,000. And on central library, again, I believe there was somebody that was looking to
Yeah, they
take over
came
some
and out
space.
Central Library, so we'll have that narrative in, it just wasn't ready at the time. Writing, still agreeing the actual words.
And then the proceeds of crime.
That one, I'm afraid I don't know.
Yeah, so this is a reserve where we hold monies that we've recovered as a result of crimes. Quite often we have to hold them while the court cases are under investigation. And then obviously when they've finished, there'll be an outcome as to what should happen to that money. So you'll see some of it's gone down because you think they're finished and they may be then used for something different. There will be detail behind that. We have to be very careful with that one because obviously there are ongoing live cases as well associated with some.
I'd encourage everyone to visit our barn in Pembroke Road, where we do hold a number of seized items as well.
So that money isn't immediately usable. Not all of it's immediately usable because you're waiting. But when you've got an outcome, some of it you can use.
We can release some of it then, but at the moment it's a ring-fenced reserve.
But presumably, once we know we can spend it, we can use it for CCTV, for example.
Yeah, we can, once we know it's not needed for we're holding,
Yeah.
then we can release it, absolutely.
And why is it going down over the 4-year period? What is that?
Again, it's estimations of what we think we've got that will come to fruition, and with those payments will be
Good
made.
news, less crime.
Or it may be we're seeing
That's
trending
possible.
crimes going down.
That is a possible explanation, right?
It'd be too good to be true, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you
you,
very
have you had Lucy, I can see your hand, but I just want to check that Greg has finished.
Yeah,
You have,
I'll start
and
there, yes, I'll get them off the hook.
Thank you. Lucy.
I just had a couple of questions. I was firstly just wanted to ask about the 10% reduction scheme and how, if we have yet, or we are going to contact those residents who are affected by that, and if they are in a position where they can't pay it, if there's any support on offer. And then also just generally, how confident are we that we are going to be afloat and continue to provide outstanding services in AAC, which I'm sure is maybe a question we can't answer, but
Thank you.
and can I add something on to the end of that question? Also, I know because it came up in my committee and Gerard said it is where there are cuts in, say, for example, AAC or children's, as committees specifically, when we might begin to see need, how are we going to be looking at that as a council and maybe bringing it to committees, and when is the first time we might be able to analyse some of the effects of the cuts and maybe
Are you talking about the next financial year?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Well, the council tax reduction scheme, we voted on it tonight. It's just not a nice thing to have to do, but it's one of those necessary evils that a 50% reduction in our budget necessitates. We've had to do it quite quickly, so we tried to give people as much notice as possible. We went out to consult. We've consulted on our budget in far more detail than all of our surrounding boroughs. I'm yet to see what Westminster, Wandsworth, H&F are planning to do in the year ahead, and it's nearly February. I think actually we've done the grown-up thing by getting out early.
Yeah.
I do appreciate not everyone is reading council consultations, but this year it was more well received. More people did respond, perhaps less well received, but they did respond. And on the specific people that are going to be losing out through council tax reduction, we obviously know who they are because they've been receiving the benefits. I think it is right that we give them a proper explanatory note when that council bill lands. What we do to support them, it's going to be very hard to know for whom it actually is completely sort of disruptive and crippling. For many, it may simply be just something that they'll be able to absorb and move on. I think we've got to sort of implement it and really work, especially with housing, because there's going to be a lot of overlap with the housing department. The small glimmer of hope is that the Labour Party have changed things like the 2-child benefit cap. So there may be some people that are in a net positive position. I don't think our data is sort of solid enough to be able for me to give you an answer on that tonight. But what we have committed to is to work with the voluntary sector to actually look at the whole scheme in totality, because there's now going to be people that are only on a 5% council tax reduction, so they're paying 95% of the tax. And actually, is that really a good use of taxpayer money, or should we have a more targeted scheme for those people that need the 95-100% reduction. So we need the time to have a proper approach and change. But actually working with the charity sectors are going to be useful because they'll know where the need is arising, they'll feel it on the ground day to day, and they might be able to pick up on things that aren't sort of the computer system won't be able to, but the actually on the ground approach would. On the bigger things, such as sort of protecting our outstanding services, we have the best adults social care department in the country. Nobody wants to put that at jeopardy. The reality is we have an aging population. We've priced in a lot of demographic growth already, and we're pricing that in for the years ahead. We've been pretty good at managing that budget within their sort of budget envelope for the years gone by. Colleagues, Emma especially, and Josh are putting huge amounts of capital into our adult social care. We've bought buildings such as Winsbridge House, where we're trying to build proper learning disability in borough, not just because it's the right thing to do, but it helps cost pressures down the line. We're also seeing issues sort of in children's placements are a very expensive part of the jigsaw puzzle. And then we've got to try and work out whether it's something we can solve through infrastructure capital or whether it's just simply that we're managing a revenue cost. I think taking the savings that we're putting forward for the year ahead, I'm very confident that actually we're not putting any of those services in jeopardy. I think this was a good year of pretty good housekeeping on some of our services. I've sort of gone through them all and thought which are the really ones that I'm a bit worried about. Council tax reduction scheme is really the one I thought was the least sort of acceptable to me. Everything else I actually think is the right thing to be doing. The years ahead of this, not tonight's paper, but the years coming, are where we have to work together on a sort of a transformative approach to how we keep the service standards up, but manage to take costs out of the system. And it's going to be a challenge for us.
Thank you. Well,
couple of questions quickly. Firstly, can you confirm, I couldn't spot on here, whether you still have a budget cap or to solve? This is the closed version.
So for next year, we have a balanced budget.
Yeah, that's a quick question. I think it would be useful if there could be further clarification of what it's made up of, how you're bearing down it, and how you share up better. I'm talking about the unaccountable costs side of the budget. The next question was to do with external. I'll do these all in one. External risks, particularly NHS, and you mentioned the other one, which was the high cost of replacements. We had a report back in FCS that there was one child that went into placement at very high cost. They then went to court because they committed a crime. And then when they came out of court, they asked the youth offending service. They went back to the same room with the same clothes and all the rest of it at a much lower cost. Because we were buying spot and they were buying bulk provision. One of the ones that worries me is the website having no budget when we are relying on our transformations to be based on Resi Gang Digi. And the absolutely essential thing of that is a completely transparent website that can be interacted with. And finally, the impact of cyber will be on reserves, particularly, because presumably we'll have to use some reserves to help pay the recovery of that. Well, that may be something you can't answer now. Maybe it'll come in the next iteration.
would you like to comment on those?
So it's sort of in reverse order. Yes, I mean, the cyber attack will cost us money. The long-term result may be that we actually have a much more efficient system, but you have to pump prime that investment, and that's essentially what reserves will have to do. I am really cognizant of the rate at which we deplete reserves year on year. In fact, I was talking to Emma earlier about what we do even when we realise a capital sale. Should we put it in a repurchase reserve to make sure we don't just spend it on day-to-day expenditure? Reserves are there for a reason, and I suppose that it is right to use them to make investments on what is nominally a spend to save project. I'm very keen that we don't simply commit a very large number to digital transformation before we've established exactly what we expect to get out of it on the other end. Consultants are very good at telling you that you're going to make huge savings, and then they leave, and then you don't necessarily realise them. And we've seen even implementing Oracle, which was over £12 million of capital cost. We called it revenue, it was capital cost. That's a huge amount of money. That's one system, and we've got hundreds of systems across the council. But every day, I think that hear a different number. Call it 400. So yes, that's the answer on that one. We will have to reserves to do that. We simply don't, given the budget gap in the years ahead, we won't have means to do that through revenue. On the children's thing, I mean, I think this is just an issue to raise with the department. They are very aware of the cost of these placements.
We do have a procurement central expertise there, don't we? So maybe the departments need to work perhaps better with the department service department.
So we do, yeah, we have a centralised procurement
Yeah.
team who support services and departments, and we obviously try to achieve the best procurement we can through various frameworks. So we're always conscious of that, and we will continue to work on them.
And then the last one was not really good.
I think unaccountable costs of the breaking and that, and how you're going to bring pressure on that.
On the
Uncontrollable.
Overhead.
overhead. Well, yes. I mean, that's the big factor of that is our buildings as well. So we do need to look at the sort of the utilisation rates of our estate. There's a lot of sort of back office functionality that we really need to drill down more into, and some things such as sort of insurance, utilities, those sorts of things we don't have a huge amount of individual influence over, but we obviously still have to pay. We're upgrading something like the lights in the town hall would cost us something like 1.4 million, but we're going to save 250,000 every year. So there's a cost, but it's your overhead, but you are then bringing in a saving in the longer term. So I think that's, in my mind, that's something we should just be doing is sort of de rigueur and just getting on with it, making sure that we're drilling down. But
rather than allocating a flat rate per officer, it might be worth looking at whether you charge the department according to the space they use, because that would incentivise them to use less space.
I think we thought we might look at this in the
I think
future.
this is one of the recommendations from your budget working group, isn't it? Recommendation for. I think what you've just recommended is an interesting point. I've done that elsewhere, but it is like herding cats because people move around, people don't come in all the time. So I think what we don't want to do is create an industry to get the numbers. So I think we need to be pragmatic about some of this.
It's more important is bringing down the overall costs as compared to how you allocate them, although obviously it introduces great incentives. Joanna.
Thank you. Put this £150 into percentage. What would that add to our council tax as a percentage?
But I've been deliberately loath to talk about the £150 because I don't want anybody in the building getting a habit for talking about it and getting into the habit of. I believe it was 17%, the 150 in the first year, and then it was 18% and then 17% in year two.
So in terms of the council tax rise that we would be expecting.
Yeah. So if you were to add those two, that takes you over 30, and then you add the 20 that the government's mandate on. We're looking at a pretty significant council tax rise.
Can I also talk about where are we on the rental recovery from the settlement? Is the cash coming in as we expected from other parties?
Yes, it's ongoing. I'm going to look to Maxine on that one because this is very sensitive issue. So
We need to go into part B first.
I won't put it to the table. I can just say that so there is an ongoing civil claims process. We are partway through it, so it needs to play out through the different processes. And so I probably just can't say much more than that at this point in this arena. But if there's a further briefing needed at any point, then I'm sure I can provide. And then just two other questions. Well, partly asked my question, but I had wanted to know how have we closed the 5.4 million shortfall that was in this last paper when we saw it?
It's that clever accounting again. No, it's so there are a variety of things that we were able to sort of call upon that we've reassessed how much we're putting forward for the pay award in the year ahead. That's changed it. There is also the environmental. Yeah, there we go.
So one of the things that came out of the settlement was actually the reduction in government funding for the first year, which is next year, was a lesser figure. So previously we'd calculated it around 21 million and it's actually 17 million. So that was a big chunk of closing the gap. And as Jim said, then we have had to do a couple of other things to just close that final bit. So I think when you saw the paper in January, we still had an £887,000 gap. So we closed that by a few things there. But what the settlement did do is it's pushed the savings into future years from the government. So whilst it's reduced it to 17 in the first year, it's then up at 20 million in the second 2 years.
Liam just reminded me, I forgot that I had all these meetings, but we did go through the capital programme again to make sure we were really bottoming out projects that weren't going to be realised in the year ahead. That saved nearly £600,000, and by just being realistic about the timing when we followed through the projects.
And then have we got any government steer on rent convergence yet in what we're doing?
Yesterday.
Oh, yes.
We got here yesterday. So the team are busily updating their housing revenue plan paper to come to leadership team on the 10th. So it's now £1 in
It's £1 a week in addition to the maximum limit from 27-28 for 27-28. So nothing permitted in 26-27. £1 a week in 27-28, and then £2 a week from 28-29.
Yeah. Thank you. Pretty.
Thank you. I have page 37, just carrying on from Will's question about cyber security. 18.28. We haven't heavily accounted for, well, it says we haven't accounted for the rents that are supposed to be paid and receipts and payments basically. So do we have any idea what that is? And plus your point 18.30, we're going to offset some of the cyber attack against the reserves. Do we have a working number for that? And I have other questions, but you can answer that first and I can ask you something.
So backwards answering the questions, we're still working out the costs around cyber recovery. It's an ongoing process. So I shouldn't give you a figure at this point in time, but there's lots of recovery work going on and we've got recovery boards and things set up working on that at the moment.
And what percentage of that figure will be offset against the reserves?
So
Are we going to do the whole lot or?
Unless we've got an underspending year, then we'll have to charge it all funded all from reserves.
Right, okay.
And then the collection of council tax and business rates, as you know, probably the day of the cyber attack, we had to take all systems down, and the system that we use for council tax and business rates is called Civica.
And plus rents. Rents are we pay to landlords and receipts.
Housing rents are slightly different, it's a different system. So focusing on council tax and business rates, we haven't yet brought that system back up. We are close. Lots of testing is going on, and we're working through, once we bring that up, how we would, first of all, communicate with residents and businesses. We have to issue a new bill. That bill has to then give people notice that we're going to take those direct debits off for them, because not everybody pays by direct debit. They're paying by instalments through sending checks, or a lot of people are paid up front as well. That's fine, and that's carrying on. It's the direct debits that have been affected by the cyber impact. So we would issue a new bill, and then 2 days later we would start taking the direct debits again from those individuals or those businesses. We're hoping that we'll be able to take a collection in February and March, and that would be the last two, because most council tax payments are paid in 10 months rather than 12, and that would be the last 2 months of the year. Obviously, we'll have to work with residents and businesses if they're struggling to pay those bills and work a payment method through with them. But we're hoping we'll get a system up very soon. We are moving, we also use the same system for housing benefits. and we are close to making a housing benefit.
So Liam wants to add something else.
I was just going on the percentages. So I estimate what's outstanding for council tax is 24% and business rate is 14% because most of it's front loaded near the start of the year. And that's largely because of the direct debit still working on getting sorted.
Right, thank you. And do you have another question?
Yes,
Lucy?
and what about the rent? And, you know, I have.
I don't have that, I'm afraid.
You don't have that, yeah, because it's, okay, and then I have, sorry. The other thing I was going to say was, page 98, the interest in capital charges and the funding. You mentioned slippage and some mention of capital financial review assumptions. That always slightly worries me. I mean, what are these assumptions? Could you possibly expand on that? Page 98.
Which paragraph is that? Oh, the third one
It's
down.
under, if you.
Review of capital.
Review of capital, yes. It says,
So this is the reference we've just had already to do. So we've reviewed the whole of the capital programme. Members and officers have spent a long time looking at the capital programme. So they've been able to, by understanding when we're going to spend the money, make sure we get the borrowing at the right time. So therefore we reduce borrowing costs, which reduces the repayment costs. We've got interest rates that come down slightly as well. So obviously we factored that into the calculation.
so the financial assumption is the interest rates you're talking about.
It's interest rates, it's timing of borrowing, and it's also the fact that we've been able to secure a loan at a reduced discount rate that we were expecting previously when we set the budget.
Because it's quite a big figure for savings, so that's quite achievable.
Yeah, cool.
And my, sorry, Chair, my final question, actually go to, I saw an underachievement that was offset on page 97 of 205,000. And I just want to make sure that we haven't had any other underachievement figures from last year that we have overlooked. And
So
my,
would you talk which one is that?
that was, I
Property
think, going
estate.
to page 97.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Underachievement.
Underachievement of 24-26 saving of 12, I know it's do we have any other, I thought I'd seen something elsewhere.
Yeah, that's the only one.
That is the only one we have, I thought, okay. And my final one is on the procurement, just, there was a mention of passive, so, contract renewals. And that basically competitive tenders and are we doing enough on our procurement that we've got enough break clauses or warranties that are linked to performance or to terminate contracts? So this is more, I'm just putting it out there. It's more public.
I've been quite impressed with our procurement team. I think a lot of the money they've saved us you won't see because it's sort of cost avoided rather than direct savings. But even recently they've been able to renegotiate in contract with Suez where we were able to get a better rate. They've absorbed some of the sort of additional costs of national insurance themselves. And that's really sort of an ongoing exercise. They have started putting some numbers together, which might be of interest to you all. And it's quite significant. What we haven't done this year, which perhaps the procurement team will be more useful at in the years ahead, is actually being able to say no to procuring a contract at all. So this year, we've mostly been trying to continue the status quo at a reduced cost. The future will have to require us to simply not have a contract as well. So that's a big part of their role will be identifying how we might be able to flex existing contracts to cover areas that we won't be procuring.
Thank you.
We've also talked about contract management in the past and how that can save us money, and perhaps reporting on making sure that we are actively imposing penalties and so on. But I think that's a question for when we look at procurement again as a committee, which I'm sure the committee will do. I just want to finish by complimenting you on the clarity of this report. Every year it gets better and answers our questions before we ask them, which is great. And also, I know lots of the consultation was aroused by one particular aspect, which was the council tax reduction scheme. But it's really cheering to see quite such a big response this year to the consultation and to be commended for that. So thank you very much. And then we'll move swiftly.
Sorry, can I just ask one question? In audit the other day, we had the financial figures come, and one of them was a £20 million loan, which was on a short-term basis, but it was at an interest rate of 6.25%.
That from Westminster.
It didn't say who it was from, but we looked at that and we queried it, and essentially the response was it was a cash flow issue. What are we doing in this budget to actually make sure we have that cash flow? Because that was a very expensive means.
The reason I say it wasn't Westminster was I was equally annoyed when I saw two loans, one from the City of London, one from Westminster. I definitely don't want to be borrowing from our near neighbours, not for cash flow purposes and not at expensive rates. What are we doing about it? Well, I did meet with the Treasury team straight afterwards once we identified it. We've got to just get a little bit tighter on our cash flow management. We don't want to be coming to the end of the year and find that we're short. This year will be interesting because of the cyber attack, and obviously we're predicting to be short. Of course, we're 24% down on council tax receipts, but that we need to get to a position where we're a bit like we've done with the capital program, that we're actually planning exactly where we need the money to be as accurate as possible. It may be that still right at the end you need to top up, but I beseech our near neighbours to be nice to us.
And it gives us an impetus to scrutinise the Treasury management strategy a bit more closely than it normally goes under the forum was important.
It was a very short-term loan, so although the interest rate was higher, it was a very
Yes.
small amount.
Yes.
I think that specifically will go live with Oracle. I think it paid a lot of payments out up front, so I think they got normal payments for about 3 weeks. So I think that was why there's a bit of a gap at the end of the year.
That's right.
Better off.
Thank you. Understood. Well, let's move swiftly on to paper A6, which is the budget working group report, and I will move the chairman of that committee to introduce it. Chairman, would you like to stay?
Yes, sorry. All in versus Polly.
Praise from your way.
There we go.
Good try.
Yes.
So first, I just wanted to thank all the members of the committee and governance and Jackie for their contribution and work towards the budget working group. We have made the recommendations to the leadership team. All the work has been carried out, and I just want to thank the committee. And if there is anything else, as chair of the OC, Mary, if you have anything to say.
No, so if you have any immediate response to, I mean, it's pretty like a response to the recommendations and themes, really.
I would just say, I think the years ahead are going to be really challenging, and we're all going to have to play our part in helping the process go through. I think this was really helpful. The themes are very good. But the meetings themselves are only a few hours long. It's the hours that we'll all be putting in behind the scenes that are really going to matter. I'm going to need as much help as possible, really, because, as I say, this year we did the savings that we thought were sort of not too painful. The years ahead are going to be really tough, so we have to be united in how we address them.
Can I ask a question?
Well, sure.
Mostly you've talked about controlling, reducing, doing things a bit more intelligently, not taking on certain things. Have you done any work in terms of starting from scratch, zero budgeting analysis? Actually, if you started, when we start off with statutory responsibilities, we get no money for. So, I mean, Maxime out in post, not being paid, carrying out duties which you have to do. It gets that ridiculous in a sense, but have we actually done a zero-based budget that starts with the absolute minimum of what we have and then building up?
So we haven't, I haven't. And I had sort of explored that as a methodology. I think the more I get into the workings, there is a huge amount of overlap between the work somebody does during the day, which is the statutory bit of their job, and then there's the non-statutory bit, and it's being able to be that precise on what percentage of somebody's hours spent is actually would go into the zero base first and what would come in as a layered piece later on is just beyond our sort of current ability to understand. I think the statutory and non-statutory overarching work that you've all done through your individual committees was really useful. At least it sort of cast a light on some of the different areas. You talked about economic development tonight, and that at least puts it in a bucket that says, well, you don't necessarily have to do it, so you can put an envelope around the cost. But there's an awful lot of things that go on in the building which are statutory, but perhaps we could be doing them more efficiently or at lower cost or whatever. So just going back to zero to end up where we are today, but with less cost, is probably not the end result I'm looking for. So we do what we need to do, but do it cheaper.
And we are doing our own exercise at zero-based budgeting in housing needs, but it hasn't necessarily been delayed by the cyber attack and various other aspects. But it's still
We're going to pick that up again in March. We got delayed because colleagues were concentrating on.
And the idea really is it's not just about that, it's to see if if it's something that's worth, or elements of which are worth pushing out to the rest of the council.
There's another sneaky one that's coming in, I think, if sitting on a hospital board, they're being pushed well, and they're talking about seeing if they can push responsibilities to in our direction without providing money. And so there is going to be an external partners pressure as well.
But I think we've also got to be honest with residents that we're going to expect residents to do more things themselves. Well, we're going to have to give people the tools to look after themselves, be they digital or whatever it may be. But certainly we can't backstop everything.
Any other comments on this paper? We've glossed over it rather quickly, given the amount of work that went into it, but I think that's because the recommendations and themes are very clear in it, and a product of actually lots of other things that we've done throughout the year. So my thanks to Preeti for putting it all together in such a concise way, and I hope that the leadership team will find it useful and constructive. And I will move us on to paper A7, which is the Nottingham Dale Keep Network. And officers are invited to come to the table for this one, and thank you to our finance team. But just to preface this with the fact that we may have to go into private session with this one, as there are papers, and if we do, I'm trusting officers to the signal if we don't spot it, that we ought to be getting into private session. Otherwise, I am going to introduce this paper and really give us an overall feel for how you feel this project is going.
So this is I think this probably it would have been a timely update anyway, but it feels particularly helpful given the impact of the administration of one of our main contractors, which is probably certainly the single biggest issue facing the project, which I think is apart from that, Mrs. Lincoln, is going fairly well and on track, certainly. So the best way to describe it is that very crudely the contracts on the project were split into two. One contract let to Vital Energy. Let me get this right, which is for the primary and secondary network. Is
primary
that
plant?
Primary plant. That is to say the installation of the heat pump itself, and then the kind of main pipework that leads from the heat pump to the buildings, and then the secondary and tertiary, which was the contract let to Synergist, which takes it from that primary network and into residents' homes. And it's the second of those contracts with Synergist where the provider Synergist have gone into administration. So you catch us at the point where we are in the process of now figuring out, as it were, both to handle how we recover as much as possible, just from a commercial point of view, from the termination of that contract, but kind of probably more importantly for the sake of the project itself, how we replan for that work to be delivered in a timely and cost-effective way in order to keep us on programme for heat on. So aside from that, and until that happened, I'd say progress was strong on target in terms of programme and budget. We are still, I think it's probably fair to say, not quite in a position where we can give you a definitive answer to how we're going to do it. I mean, James, perhaps we can talk through a bit more about kind of
I think it's probably possible to talk through some of the kind of high level options that we're looking at without leading to trigger
Yes,
a
in
private
general, we should
conversation.
try and keep as much of the
Yeah,
public
obviously
domain
we
as
can't
possible.
exactly, and I don't think we we can do that at high level without needing to go into anything commercial, which is a private session. But I think it's probably what we can't do just at this moment is sit here and say we've got a plan absolutely nailed down, which takes us through that. But I think the options we're looking at several options at the moment, which should be able to move us forward without too much disruption. Is that a fair summary, James?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you say to fill in the gap?
Yeah, and so at a high level, with really good support from colleagues in legal and procurement and some external legal advice as well. It's a combination of potentially looking at probably diversifying the works, splitting the works up based on what's going on the rest of the Lancaster estate at the moment. So we've got some existing contractors. Potentially, it makes sense not just from a cost point of view, but also just from taking a holistic approach to doing a lot of work in one place over a same period of time. So there's a contract variation route. There's a compliant direct award of packages of work route as well, and then there's open market. In terms of trying to get the right balance between demonstrating good value for money in terms of rewarding the works, as well as not losing too much time in terms of the delivery. That's what we're weighing up in terms of some of the conversations, negotiations we're having. I think it's important to say that the decision to split the works up was precisely to ensure that we didn't have all the eggs in one basket. And so unfortunately, in a way, that's proven to be a good decision. I suppose, but it does mean that we have got a heat network contractor active and live on the estate who did bid originally for the secondary and tertiary work the first time round. And so there's potentially an option there. In terms of the delivery of the work, a lot of it has been extremely sensitive in terms of the proximity to people's homes, the Grenfell Tower site and the Memorial Wall as well. But I'm pleased to say in terms of progress on the primary network, that should all be complete in terms of the pipes by the end of March this year. And so we'll start doing the interesting stuff above ground that people will actually see in terms of the SLC heat pumps works to the Kensington Leisure Centre, the co-designed energy tree, which is essentially a giant communal hot water store, and the electric boiler room. We do have contractors on site as well who are able to do the domestic upgrades, and they continue to do that as part of the refurbishment program internally to residents' homes, but they aren't able or permitted contractually to do things at the scale we need. So we will need to be appointing a replacement contractor to greater or lesser extent to replace synergies.
Thank you. Is the committee happy to go around and talk about the stuff we definitely can talk about in public? And then I'll take a sense of whether you want to go into private session after that. Okay, I'll start with Greg.
Thanks very much. So my question is and I appreciate you can't give us a plan tonight that's setting tablets of stone, but what's your understanding and expectation on the timelines ahead for replacement of Sanagis, please?
Yeah,
I don't want to go into any costs in this, but if you need to go into private, we can do it later.
No,
I don't necessarily want the private answer on it unless you think there's something to say.
No, I think that's absolutely fine. So I'll sort of set out those three routes we're exploring. I think it will be a blend of all three potentially, and some are quicker than others. So in terms of we've got a main works contract due for consideration by the leadership team imminently within the next couple of months for the walkways, which is the main refurbishment work to the walkways. That's an existing contractor as well, who's also on site. So to some extent, there are some synergies, if you excuse the pun there, in terms of us potentially bringing some of those works together rather than previously it was the heat network and the heat network alone. So that's something that will fold in. So for the walkways programme, we should be on track in terms of delivering the works and in spring next year being able to connect those blocks potentially, subject to the outcome of that decision. I think the other end of the spectrum, I suppose, is anything where we need to go to open market on. Obviously, we need to have our own internal processes of that, and also in terms of working with somebody new, that generally takes a longer period of time as well. So in the paper, we talk about a May 27 heat on date. I think that in some, I would say the network as a whole will be ready then, but in terms of connecting different parts of the estate and the leisure centre, of course, the baseline studios, that's likely to be a more phased approach than was previously intended. And it's fair to say there are other reasons around access, delays to some of the works to the leisure centre, where I think that would have happened anyway. So yeah, I think that we'll be able to meet some of the timelines that have been set out. But I think in terms of the end of the programme, I think that's longer than we would like.
Okay, I'll leave it there.
Okay, Lucy, do you have any questions?
No, correct, it's kind of
Main question will be in private. The suggestion I wanted to make, question whether it would be useful once the dust settled and we've got things in play to get a comparative study between the Clarion Sutton Estate ground source heat pump network and the approach that we've taken to this project.
Yeah, happy to. I mean, on the heat source specifically, ground source wasn't viable, mainly just to do with a spatial issue. We did explore ground source heat pump for one residential property, in fact, and we ended up moving away to air source heat pump. I know you know, Councillor, ground source heat pump, if you've got the space and logistics to do it, are far more efficient and reliable, certainly, in cost.
Just the Sutton Estate is a very close proximity to set of buildings. You can't see anything.
Yeah.
And the amount of kit in each flat is at this side.
Yeah, but it would be the same for Nottingham Heat on the internal.
But it would be useful to compare, because they used a slightly different contractual approach as well. So just to learn lessons, I think.
And it's worth saying partly because of some of the grants we've had quite a lot of involvement and eyes on the project from officials at the GLA and in government who are themselves very familiar with other projects in London. So we benefit from the kind of the learning and comparison to other kind of projects. Although it's probably fair to say there aren't that many at this scale that are going on in London.
Retrofit, absolutely.
But certainly we're kind of well plugged into those networks.
Just as an example of social housing again. So
yeah, no, absolutely right.
It's probably worth adding on that point, Councillor. It's referred to in the report about the technical assurance we've achieved through the Zero Carbon Accelerator through the GLA. As of 2 weeks ago, the technical analysis that I've done has shown that our primary plant is actually more efficient than we anticipated. So there's some positive news as well. But
the other thing that I've noticed in the report in relation to the schemes, older schemes, is that it's now a statutory requirement to have metering.
Yes.
Presumably you've got meters that are really accurate.
We don't even have meters at the moment, other than on the communal boiler. So you've got 366 properties all just paying their share of a communal meter.
So they pay a share based on the size of the
bedroom size, bedroom number. Sorry, yeah.
So they've got no incentive to
not the temperature. No. As of 2 days ago, that is something which we'll be discussing just today. In terms of this affects, I think, the 32 heat networks certainly that sit within housing management, and obviously in terms of our new build scheme. They're generally, because they're new build, more compliant. But this is something which the housing sector as a whole is grappling with. I think because of the work that we've done, Nottingham Heat, some of you know, it's been a programme in gestation from about 2020. So we're ahead of a curve in terms of what we need to do and how. But the scale of what we're catching up with does mean that there's a lot of work all going on at the same time. But moving past
the only question to Park.
Joanna.
Thank you. I was intrigued. We went on a housing visit the other day and in the new builds, and one of the conversations was regarding how new kit works and that the heating wasn't as warm as people expected, albeit that it actually provides an all-round heat. And I look at this and I kind of go, there's a lot in this about the risks of the heat not being hot enough or not being warm enough. And I look at you're looking at a backup electric, and I just find myself sitting here going, I read in the Times the other day that actually heat pumps are actually being more expensive to run because the electricity charge is higher. So
we've given a price guarantee.
Yes, that too.
So we're exposed to it. Yeah, it's the council, as it were, rather than the residents who are exposed to that financial risk.
Yeah. So I kind of look at, what can we do, both in terms of learning curve on the estates to date, that people have struggled to understand how the system works, and secondly, how do we get some control over those costs? Because for me, the whole thought about having these electric heaters as a backup leaves you in, or indeed even an extra capacity, not in a backup, just the systems fail, just seems to be undermining lots of the whole rationale behind this in the first place. So I'm trying to throw out a question, but I'm not entirely sure what my question is. But how do we?
It's all going to be very expensive, I think.
Yeah, how do we reduce the risk and the cost?
I think there's a lot of very good questions in there. I must say, I'll try and address them. So I think the first thing is one of the risks with heat networks, for the reasons you're saying, is ultimately electricity prices unit by unit are about 3 to 4 times the price of gas at the moment. I mean, it's highly likely for various reasons over the next 5 to 10 years that will even out, if not reverse. One of the ways in which the heat pump works is it basically uses 1 unit of electricity to create sort of 3 units of heat. So there's an efficiency within the air source heat pump. You don't get that with an electric boiler, you're quite right, but we'd only have the electric boiler there really just to cope with sudden cold snaps, massive ups in demand, so that we're able to absorb that, if you will. We're anticipating that less than 10% of the heat would be generated by the electric boiler, so it's very much there as a backup, so we don't rely purely on the air source heat pumps. And if all 3 of them were to be out of action or needed replacement, as may well be the case at some point, that we've got a way to mean that 2,500 people aren't without heating and hot water. You mentioned a bit there around the transition piece, and the resident transition is something that we've always had as a work stream, various aspects of that on Lancaster West. Just to sort of paint one picture, in 2018 when we arrived, the temporary boiler there was providing, or is still providing, heating and hot water for 366 households. And they're in a place where we as a landlord decide when their heating is on 6 months a year and when it is off. We had people not without the radiator valves even, but without central thermostats, so it's either on or off. And as we've talked about, individual meters are not present either. So we are taking people, we talk a lot about the 21st century model estate, and I often say we're taking people from the 19th century to the 21st rather than the 20th to the 21st. So there is a lot to take people on that journey. I'm pleased to say 350 households across the estate now have smart stats. They have radiators that they can turn on and off to different temperatures. But the reality is we have a highly inefficient, or 2 highly inefficient heat networks in single glazed dwellings, where you'll have some rooms that are really hot even in December, 30 degrees, and some rooms which are very cold even in the summer. So there is a lot that we are taking people on that journey. The Lancaster West refurbishment, which will bring a lot of energy efficiency and a lot of benefits, mainly because of the funding gap, which we are working on and trying to resolve with central government, does mean that we will have, by the time of the heat network being finished, let's say next year, we will have maybe a third of the estate fully refurbished, 2/3 that isn't. What we are now doing, and in a way, the Synergist administration has allowed us to sort of reflect on, is we're doing what we're calling thermal comfort pilots. Firstly, to test technically, is the heat network as designed, which was designed for 21 degrees, in non-refurbished properties, can it get to the temperatures that people are used to? The short answer to that is yes, more or less. So what we were worried about is without refurbishment, we wouldn't be able to get the temperatures high enough. And as I say, there are a lot of people, I can think of one particular case where a resident told me that she is used to having her windows wide open in December. And she was questioning when there was a heating outage just affecting her property, you know, why that was. And so that piece, and the technical side of things we're confident we can resolve. Also within the home, in the heat interchange units, interface units, that look like mini boilers, people, even with a lower temperature network as designed, people will be able to turn it up. And so people will have a choice there. The issue is that people who are used to living at those higher temperatures, and we have a lot of residents who do, will have to pay for that because of the individual metering. So we're doing a lot of work in terms of about 20 residents are allowing us to monitor their heating so we can play back to them. If you were on an individual meter, this is how much you would pay. We've also got residents sitting in some pilot properties testing as per the new network, which is a lower temperature coming into the home. How long does it take to heat up and so on? How does it feel? How does it compare to your home? So there's a live bit of work doing that now, because we're under no illusions. There's one thing getting it technically delivered. There's another around perceptions of comfort, which is really important. Managing the transition in terms of how do people work and operate things. And certainly in terms of the risk, I mean, if it's not a issue around, something failing, it's usually around landlord passes on massive bill to residents through heat network and so on. We have been in a place where we can, within the housing revenue account, we've afforded a subsidy of sorts when it goes live. Obviously, the delay in a way reduces that financial risk to some sense to 2030, which is, of course, when the council has made its commitment for all social housing to be carbon neutral by that point. Again, there's flexibility with regards to that. But in terms of the way we're being driven from a strategy point of view, it does mean that I think the heat network, from what is the council's largest estate, will be fully compliant with all the new regulations that we're talking about. And just today we were talking about how we apply that learning to the wider borough, which I'm pleased to say is increasingly happening.
Thank you. Very comprehensive. Can I just ask, how are you communicating the current delay or what's been happening to residents?
Yeah, so we have a range of channels that we use. So we've got about half of our residents subscribe to an e-newsletter, which is obviously something that's far more immediate, convenient, also cheaper and quicker for us to get out than sort of conventional printed newsletters. In 2018, the estate was getting a fortnightly printed newsletter posted to every home and so on. We have social media channels, principally Instagram, WhatsApp community groups as well. And obviously we've got our WR11 website, which is a repository for information. It might be around leasehold costs, charges, the price promised, because there is a lot of residents who are already struggling to pay the bills as they are. They're worried about what does individual metering do to them. I would also say, though, I think communication engagement is something as good as it is, and then that's not me saying that, that's national government and awards providers and so on. I think we need to do far more, particularly around working on a household by household basis, understanding what the usage looks like and when, people's worries and concerns. We're a hyper diverse London estate, 80% of our residents global ethnic majority, so we have quite a lot of people who don't necessarily speak English or don't necessarily engage with digital technology. And we're doing a lot of work as we start to phase up the engagement in the walkways for the refurbishment to join things together. So we've got a resident liaison team in-house as well as on the contractor side, and we will have when we have a contractor back, and they're working hand in glove to make sure that we're tailoring some of these conversations household by household. Because all very well me looking at a bell curve and going, well, most people, will be fine. The overcrowded household who might have somebody who's bedbound and at home, or lots of children and so on, they're the ones who are most at risk until we get that refurbishment done, because they're living with single glazed windows and so on and so forth. So we're under no illusions of the complexity and the challenge. And I think in terms of communication, it is an area I would say we need to improve.
Thank you, Tracy. Okay, thank you for that. James, forgive me if I've missed anything on your report. I found the report, I couldn't quite gauge, how much it's cost so far. The next thing, if I'm correct in reading what the report says, that there's another additional 12 million to be spent. That's, since Synergist has gone, you cannot claim, and it will stop me if I'm not about.
Are we going into part B?
Yeah.
Not yet. Okay.
Second question.
Well, then I think the next thing I'm going to, what's the cost to date? With the price cap on the heating, what is the buffer between the price of electricity? How do you calculate it? What buffer do we have? And to expand on Joanna's point, I agree. I mean, I read that article last week and said, and I have heat pumps, and I know my bill's gone up quite a lot. So, how prepared are we for that? And the other thing is, I found there are too many hypotheticals in the next phase. And the last one was, did we do enough due diligence for Synergist?
That's going to part B.
So,
Yeah, that
So
one.
anything that so we'll ditch the last question to part B, and you can answer the others, and then we'll move into part B.
Yeah, so on the cost, I can provide the committee with a detailed breakdown, but the overall programme is approximately £28 million, I would say. That's primary the plant, that's design costs, things like substation. We've built 2 substations. and the housing revenue account side, the secondary and tertiary. So about halfway through that, I would say. In terms of synergists, the figure you referred to was the original contract. We had, shortly before they went into administration, had a key decision approved, which was a reallocation of existing programme budget within the contract. So it wasn't an increase of budget per se, it was within the overall contract programme envelope, sorry. But because synergies went into administration, we never ended up getting that into the contract.
That was around 6 million, right?
No, I can talk about that in closed session if that's okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the electricity piece, I mean, the thing I would say with Lancaster West, we've got a temporary boiler literally sitting on the street and two very inefficient systems. So from a cost point of view, the level of efficiency we will be delivering compared to what status quo is pretty substantial. We have as well, principally through grant funding, installed solar panel arrays on 6 of our buildings, well 5 on the estate, I should say, Lancaster West estate. We're envisioning about 10% of electricity will be able to, that the heat network requires, will be able to come from that solar panel array or arrays, as well as providing things like communal electricity for lights, lifts where we've got and so on. So that will take the edge off of that as well. And I think certainly where we've been able to deliver the refurbishment of Lancaster West blocks, which will be Treadgold House, which will be going live as a pilot mini heat network, if you like, later this year, and the walkways, and we'll definitely be doing some, at least partial works to the rest of the estate. That will substantially reduce the level of heat that is required. Broadly speaking, and I'll touch on the due diligence point, it's a 75% reduction of heat demand is what we're anticipating once the estate is fully refurbished. So in terms of moving A to B, there's substantial reduction there in terms of usage, and that's the main saving we can make as a landlord and also for our residents, is reduce how much heat that they need. In terms of due diligence, that is something at various stages of this that we have brought in. So although
Sorry?
Are we in part B now?
Well, I'm trusting James.
No,
to tell me what
I'm
being.
sailing away from the edge, I think. So in terms of technical due diligence, we brought in various experts at various points of the programme. We established when we were looking at Nottingdale Heat being delivered through an SPV as a company, we established a board, the first heat network we believe in the country, with residents on the board, as well as council officers, as well as independent industry experts, if you like. And that was based on learning from Robin Hood Energy, Bristol, other places in terms of the governance mix that they had. So all throughout, I think we've brought in expertise as such as there is, because I think a lot of what happens on Lancaster West in the context of Grenfell, and a lot of what we do as a council is unique, but we have sought to learn as far as we possibly can. As I say, McDonald's are currently on the scene at the moment providing technical due diligence, and that's alongside what you might call the standard multidisciplinary consultants that any major works project would have within the council. So personally, I think the level of due diligence we've done has been very good. On the specific commercial point, happy to answer in closed session.
Lovely. Okay, and I've just got.
Chair, may I just one more? There's a mention of for the leisure centre that we need to rebuy some heat pumps. And I can't find the page.
I think that's in part. It's pretty.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. I just wanted to ask, paragraph 4.4, you've kindly split out, which I think we've discussed, where we are with which the delivery status. What it doesn't tell me is whether we are on track with all of them. So in progress or not started might mean not started but should have started, or in progress but too slowly. Are we actually on target with all of the activities in terms of your Gantt chart that I don't want to see but must exist somewhere?
I'll do my best to avoid a Gantt chart
Thank you
response.
very much.
So broadly speaking, we've probably lost 2 months on the primary and the plant in terms of design programme. I think given the sensitivities and complexities, I think that is, I've certainly done a great job. Wider council colleagues, we've had to engage with Grenfell Town Memorial Commission, Grenfell site team of government that have been hugely supported as well. Ironically, perhaps, because we're now delayed in terms of the secondary and tertiary, but actually we were ahead of programme until they went into administration, interestingly. And in anything, we're having to slow down delivery, mainly from a resident disruption perspective, and making sure people were happy in terms of the pipes that have been installed, what they were for, and people were worried, and so on. We now are now in a place essentially where I think the overall connection of each block is delayed. But in terms of Treadgold House going live this year and starting to get blocks connected in spring, I think that will still happen. And I think in a way, the level of complexity is something that until to some extent you actually get on the ground and start doing the work. So there are things that have emerged, which, as I've alluded to with the walkways, it is far less disruptive for residents, which has been key around things like having to put scaffold up twice and so on. So we've had a lot of understandable concern around noise and disruption. So in a way, there are benefits to it being a slower program, if you like, well, clearly because we don't have a contractor, those delays aren't incurring costs directly to us per se, although the re-procurement is likely to make some inflationary pressure.
Thank you. Shall we move now into part B? And under doing so under paragraph 3 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, because the report contains information related to the financial business affairs of a particular person, including the authority holding that information. Luke, would you confirm that we're offline?
Not yet. Can the committee just need to agree?
Does the committee agree with me? Sorry, thank you very much. Sorry, I was presumptuous to assume.
should be.
Lovely. Diana, do you want to ask your question again?
Thank you. Could you explain funding basis for the price guarantee, and is that out of the HRA or the general fund?
Certainly, so it's a part of the housing revenue account. So under the model where the heat network was delivered by a company or in-house, price promise that we've co-designed with residents has always been something that was would be afforded by the housing revenue account. Just in terms of context, for all manner of reasons, there is effectively a subsidy already, certainly for the walkways heat network on Lancaster West Estate. So we're basically we're not charging as much as it costs us. Various reasons for that, and just for further sort of illumination, the temporary boiler that is there because previously the boiler was adjacent to Grenfell Tower, and of course, following the tragedy was rendered obsolete. So when we engaged with residents on the possibility of bringing in a heat network, there were various concerns that came up, and the number one, unsurprisingly, was cost. And as we talked about, there are a lot of adverse implications in terms of people moving onto a heat pump and finding their bills going up and so on. Given Lancaster West, of all the heat networks within the borough, Walkways one is the most expensive in terms of the average cost, mainly because of the inefficiency and the huge amount of glazing. And the other large heat network on Lancaster West is the third most expensive. So we're already dealing with a sort of a high cost situation, given all the issues that we've already discussed around the difference in cost between gas and electricity. What we did, and we believe we're the only heat network in the country that has done this and co-designed it with residents, been featured by the Treasury no less, is de-risk the cost risk from a resident and user perspective. So rather than effectively saying, right, we're going carbon neutral, but you're going to sit with the risk as a customer, we've de-risked that. So essentially, in terms of moving to carbon neutral heating and hot water for Treadwell House residents mid-2026, and hopefully for the rest of the estate 2027, so well ahead of the 2030 carbon neutral commitment by the council, we said what we will do is charge you per unit the lesser amount of gas, so as is now, versus a heating hot water unit, if you like, through the new heat network. Now, interestingly, when we co-designed this originally, gas was substantially cheaper, and the cost of the HRA was around £100,000, split across 126 properties. When we last looked at it 6 months ago, our heat network was actually yielding cheaper prices than communal gas. So we're in a place where I think the gap, the risk financially is becoming less and less, subject to sort of black swan events like we've seen with the invasion of Ukraine and so on. And so I think financially, that's probably less of a risk now compared to the increased capital expenditure we're going to have to see in terms of synergies. However, for residents, it's been absolutely crucial. We've had residents from not on the estate, we've had private owner occupiers from not on the estate, see what's going on, understand what we're doing to try and control pricing, and are asking to join. Often we say, let's get this finished first, but we have got capacity within the networks to potentially, James and I were discussing this earlier, potentially join other social housing blocks. Notting Dale, as you know, 7% of it is social housing, and it's called the Notting Dale Heat Network precisely because technically, subject to residents agreeing, it's something that we would like to see that investment benefit more and more people. That may well be well beyond 2030, and the price promise at that point is something that will continue.
Good. In the absence of any other questions on this paper, I wanted particularly to come back into public session to finish it so that we have an opportunity to thank Dan, because this is your very, very last meeting, probably, and I'm glad it's with us. But just to say thank you very, very much. You've always come willingly to this committee, haven't been dragged kicking and screaming, and given us open and very constructive answers, and we're very grateful for that. So thank you very much. I think the committee will join with me in wishing you all the best in your future.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah,
It's been a real pleasure.
so thank you very much. Now you can escape, because we are going to move on to the next paper, which is paper A8, which is the core parliamentary decisions. Did I hear someone say just imagining it. Yes. And Are there any things that people would pick up? No? Excellent, good. So I know you all read it beforehand. And then we're going on to paper A9. I've now managed to lose that one, which is the work programme. Thank you very much. No, I think I've got it. And it's really weird. Any comments on this?
Next one. Due to the extreme step change that the whole budget area and cost of changes that we're having to make in response to that, would it be useful to have a briefing on where things are at the beginning of the scrutiny year? In other words, as soon as the scrutiny committees have been constituted, because my experience with scrutiny, and everybody's probably the same, is that we have, particularly when there's an election year, the committees formed. We then have a series of workshops, and then unless we're very, very quick off the mark, we don't do an awful lot of a break. And the scrutiny year only starts seriously in the autumn.
So obviously we can't hold future committees, but can I suggest to Jackie that we think about that?
Yeah, I was going to come back to the committee with a proposal, having discussed with Mary recently. So for the June meeting for each committee, I was going to talk to the current chairs committees, maybe at the last round, because I think it would be useful to commission the reports now at the June meeting, because there won't be time after the election, with a focus on what would it be useful for a new committee to look at. So you know what are the things that are coming up, the budget, transformation, other things, to get the committees up to speed.
Well, I think you know the subject well. You just said that this is budget transformation, and then in each committee there'll then be a specialist sort of group of subjects that come up. Some statutory.
So Jackie will speak to each of you, and I will definitely agree with you. Well, do budgets and transformation.
In governance terms, we can't bind the 50. What we can do is to make sure they're properly briefed.
You can't bind them, but I think it's a good use of councillor time to have that meeting planned out, and it gets everybody up to speed.
And if the new chairman decides to
they
can say so. But
and then the officers can say, well, we don't have time. So I think you've been all chairing for at least 2 years, more than that. You know what needs to come up.
Can I say I don't think that should necessarily just be an election year.
Yes, I agree.
I would agree with you.
Yeah.
I wanted to use the election year.
Slowly, you're going to creep up on that. In the absence of any other urgent business, I can meet closed. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.